Helmets are for safety. Welcome back to Random, and today I'm back here at ATK Rocket Garden, where we're going to talk a little bit about nuclear energy, what it is, why it is, how it operates, and why only fools in California are terrified of it. But first, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. If you enjoy groovy tunes and cold beverages, check out Beer and Song of the Day. Link to that channel will be in the description down below. Also, go over to Twitch TV and check out Scoop the Avenger. He's a friend of the channel. Checking him out would help us out a great deal, so please do that. So here we are, ATK Rocket Garden, again standing in front of the Minuteman I missile right here, talking about nuclear energy. Now, I needed to do this video before my editor skived off to Orlando for a week, leaving me in the back of his truck to freeze to death, because he's a bum. Anyway, nuclear energy is the process of deriving energy from either the splitting of or the fusing of atoms. For us, currently, the best source of nuclear energy is fission, a process of splitting uranium atoms, specifically, at least, well, for what we have now. Now, there are other fissionable materials, thorium being one. The reason we don't use thorium, unfortunately, is because the United States likes its nuclear weapons, and the best way to get them is to use uranium fuel, uranium enrichment processes, and so on, to create critical mass for nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, you can't do that with thorium. For thorium, basically, it is literally splitting a thorium atom and creating heat to boil water to create steam. That steam turns a turbine that generates your energy. Thorium cannot be used to create nuclear weapons. Produces less hazardous fuel. I should say less hazardous waste product that has a much shorter half-life than the waste product created by fissioning uranium. So basically, thorium produces just as much energy, just as long as uranium. You just can't make nuclear weapons with it, and its waste has a shorter half-life, so it's less hazardous for longer. Nuclear energy using uranium. Okay, so what happens is you get a bunch of uranium atoms together, and they're really, really close together, okay? So what happens is a neutron from a neutron source. Now, whether that's plutonium or an ongoing reaction, let's say your reaction is already underway, and you've got fast-moving neutrons flowing around inside of a nuclear reactor's core. And what happens is those neutrons will interact with the nuclei of uranium. Now, once that happens, that nuclei becomes unstable and it splits into threes. The waste products of that reaction can range from iodine, cesium, strontium, xenon, and krypton. Now, each of those different byproducts has a different reaction inside of the reactor. Xenon specifically is basically a neutron inhibitor, basically slows down the reaction. So how we get rid of that is our reactors will burn a little bit hotter. That xenon will effectively burn off and be removed during the reaction process. So that's how we get rid of that particular product. Now, as the reaction's going, this is happening billions of times per second in a nuclear reactor's core. So all this energy is being released. You're generating heat. You're generating that heat is being carried away by, in our case, water, specifically heavy water. So this is water that has 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom, and the hydrogen atoms having more neutrons in them than standard hydrogen. Heavy water is what it is. And if you take a gallon of heavy water and a gallon of regular drinking fresh water, the heavy water will be something to the tune of 2 or 3 pounds heavier than the regular drinking water. So that's kind of cool, right? All right. So that's fission, the splitting of an atom. Now, when we're talking about unfortunate things like what gets put on the top of this Minuteman I missile, that is an uncontrolled nuclear reaction. So that is a reaction where basically it's a runaway. And once it hits a critical mass and the reaction begins, it starts taking the uranium that is part of the explosive device, and it generates it all into waste products and energy. Now, I know what you're saying, well, wait a minute, most of those waste products aren't gaseous. What happens to the heavier elements like the iodine and the cesium after the reaction? Well, they're vaporized completely. So for all intents and purposes, the iodine and the cesium and the strontium basically attach to atmospheric molecules, and they're in a gaseous state. So for all intents and purposes, during all the testing, during Operation Plum Bob back in the 1960s, I think it was, and of course Hiroshima and Nagasaki, what happened, and the Trinity test, what happens is those elements, as they were created from the critical mass and the explosion, they basically attached to atmospheric molecules, and they are still in basically suspension in the atmosphere. They haven't precipitated out yet. So for all intents and purposes, at Hiroshima, at Nagasaki, you could, in theory, be breathing iodine or cesium compounds from the uranium being used in the nuclear devices. Let's see where to go from here. Now, there is such a thing as fusion type nuclear devices. Those, unfortunately, to make them viable as a weapon, you have to make them pretty big, because the fusion process, at least for now, requires the use of hydrogen isotopes, and to keep those isotopes in suspension and put them in a critical mass, you need quite a large amount of it, and it's not really efficient. Basically, you would end up with a device that is basically impossible to carry unless you use a C5. Wildly inefficient and wildly difficult to make efficiently for a particular tactical decision, a particular tactical strike, or strategic strike, I should say. So more often than not, we'll use uranium and plutonium as our fissionable materials. That's typically what we'll use. Now, the different altitudes of releasing a nuclear weapon have different effects. I can already hear you down in the comment section, what about fallout? Well, see, that's what happens when you drop a nuclear bomb or a nuclear warhead and it actually impacts on the ground and then detonates. What will happen is it'll kick up a whole lot of dust. That dust will be introduced into the ongoing uncontrolled nuclear reaction. That dust will absorb things like iodine and cesium and strontium and those different isotopes, and of course they'll become radioactive and you'll have fallout. Now, I can already hear you in the comment section again, why about Nagasaki and Hiroshima? Okay, so those two bomb strikes, those were the only two times in history those locations were struck with nuclear weapons. So the fallout that did occur from those nuclear strikes is by far and away in lower concentrations than the nuclear test ranges in New Mexico that were used in Operation Plum Bob, where the United States basically detonated nuclear weapons over and over and over and over and over again, and creating just clouds and deserts and just completely annihilating that entire range with nuclear fallout. And of course, people downwind ended up having disproportionate amounts of cancer and different heavy metal reactions due to all the nuclear fallout in the atmosphere and the soil and the groundwater, and basically made a huge mess. And thanks, Uncle Sam. Really appreciate that. So that's nuclear fission as a weapon. Now, again, where we're talking nuclear reactions or nuclear energy for civilian purposes, we're talking about nuclear power plants, things that under normal circumstances wouldn't fail catastrophically unless A, they were poorly designed, or B, an act of God happens and basically it spirals out of control. The Fukushima nuclear incident would be chief among those examples. That, of course, happening because of a tsunami and an earthquake all hitting at the same time. The generators, the backup generators, being stored or positioned in a rather unfortunate position in the basement of the reactor buildings, which, when it flooded from the tsunami, it basically snowballed. That'll have to be a different video, along with the disaster that was Chernobyl. But in a reactor, in a nuclear reactor, when it's operating properly, the way we control that is with boron control rods that'll be inserted by gravity into the reactor. Now, if a reaction starts to spiral and starts to go a little out of control, what they'll do is they'll slam the control rods down into the core and slow everything back down to a more manageable reaction time, a more manageable state. Now, if for whatever reason that doesn't stop or control the reaction and get everything back under control, what we'll do is we'll release something called boric acid, which is a boron solution, a high concentration boron solution, into the heavy water of the reactor core. And that boron solution will absorb the excess neutrons from the reaction and stop it dead. Stop it completely. Basically, it's a last-ditch effort to say, holy crap, this reactor's going to blow. Hit the neutron killer, shut it down, and it'll stop the reactions dead. Very important. So that's the neutron killer and the boron control rods. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, why didn't the Soviet Union have anything like that? Because it was Russia, and they don't know what they're doing half the time. So, yeah. Anyway, that's nuclear energy. That's basically how we do things, at least in terms of nuclear fission, nuclear fusion. We're actually starting to get a little bit more progress in the fusion area. That should happen ideally within the next 10 years. We'll have nuclear fusion capable of supporting cities, supporting entire complexes and neighborhoods, and basically be able to have limitless, clean, renewable energy with nuclear fusion. Unfortunately, again, there's people that are scared of that, namely morons. Anyway, if you learned something from this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe down below. Tell me what I'm doing right. Tell my editor that he's a bum for leaving me for a week and not feeding me. And anyway, till next time, keep it random.